Jason and Craig Cox launched a brazen raid on a Liverpool stash house in May 2020, stealing 30 kg of cocaine worth about £1.2 million. And by 2025 the law had caught up, ordering them to pay back £80, £18.26 or face 9 more months behind bars. In the quiet suburbs of Liverpool in May 2020, the ordinary calm of a residential street was shattered by something extraordinary. Behind the facade of semi-detached homes and parked cars, a criminal plan was underway, one so bold it would soon echo through the underworld and the halls of justice alike. Two brothers, part of a larger organized crime family, made their move. Their target, a stash house belonging to a powerful local gang, storing roughly 30 kilograms of Class A cocaine, a haul estimated at around $1. The neighborhood would come to bear the scars of that heist. The brothers arrived under the cover of dusk, their van pulling silently up outside the house. CCTV later showed masked men, dressed in dark clothing, climbing from the vehicle and advancing towards the property. Within minutes, the raid was executed. Force was used, the occupants subdued, the drugs seized, and the assailants vanished into the night. TheDailyExclusives.com. What made this more than just a theft was the context. The house belonged to a criminal network, notorious in the region. The gang's reach stretched across the northwest, distributing high-value cocaine and cannabis. The sheer audacity of stealing from such a group sent ripples through the criminal ecosystem. The brothers were no mere opportunists. They were stepping into a dangerous game of power, betrayal, and retribution. In the immediate aftermath, the gang that had been robbed was furious. Though the drug stash was gone, the threat they perceived was deeper. Someone had invaded their territory, breached their trust, and exposed them to risk. Their first response was fury. Their second, confusion. They had believed another dealer had taken the stash. Evidence from intercepted encrypted messages later revealed they were wrong. The raid was carried out by the two brothers and their accomplices. Inside the stolen stash, the weight was staggering. 30 kilograms of high-purity cocaine meant for distribution. Such a quantity could supply many thousands of users, and carried value far beyond just the street price. When the gang realized what had been lost, they began an aggressive search for the perpetrators. Within the criminal world, loss of product is loss of reputation and control. The higher the stakes, the higher the risk of brutal retaliation. For the brothers, the raid marked not only a heist, but a turning point. It provided opportunity, but also vulnerability. Their network would have to move fast, extract the value, avoid detection, and manage the consequences. They had broken into a world of violence, wealth, and shadows. The stash house was the body of the beast. The theft was the wound that exposed the beast. Meanwhile, law enforcement eyes were already turning. The gang's communication network, once considered impenetrable, had been cracked by investigators. What looked like a flawless smash and grab soon began to show fissures. CCTV, mobile phones, encrypted chats, and the bodies of high-risk players all converging into an investigation that would grow deeper than the robbery itself. TheDailyExclusives.com. At the time, for the brothers, the adrenaline must have been high. The risk, the reward, the sharp edge of criminal boldness. But the tale of what came next would show that seizing the drugs was only the beginning. The real battle was in staying one step ahead of the gang they stole from, and the state that was watching. In the quiet street of Liverpool, the crime was done. What followed would turn inside out, the world of organized trafficking. After the heist, the two brothers found themselves on the run. Even though they had pulled off what seemed like a perfect strike, they vanished from plain sight. But in fleeing they made mistakes that would slowly unravel their plan. One of them crossed into Spain, believing distance would protect him, while the other stayed closer to the noise of their criminal network. Crown Prosecution Service.
3-2.
Liverpool World. 2. They might have thought they'd escaped immediate danger from the gang they robbed, but in fact they had lit a fuse. The gang's revenge engine started turning. They were not just angry about losing the $1.2 million loot. They were furious about being exposed. Intercepted, encrypted messages later showed the original gang believed someone else was responsible, and they began plotting strikes against the wrong targets. 80v. 2. Birkenhead News. 2. Inside their hideout in Spain or wherever they hunkered down, the brothers must have known that moving the stash, turning it into cash, and staying ahead of the gang and the police were all part of the same race. The heist injected them into a dangerous underground split between violence and finance. At the same time, the gang they had robbed was not inert. They began reorganizing. Methods of intimidation, misdirection, threats were deployed. The twist. The gang thought someone unaffiliated was behind the theft, and as a result began targeting individuals who had nothing to do with it, while the actual thieves watched from the shadows. Meanwhile, law enforcement was beginning to piece together the threads. One major tool in their arsenal was the collapsed encrypted network known as EncroChat. In April-June 2020, messages from that system were intercepted, revealing how organized crime groups discussed drugs, money, and revenge. The brothers' heist network lay somewhere in this mine of data, and the investigators gradually mapped routes, aliases, financial leads. What seemed like an isolated raid became part of a much bigger picture, an organized crime family supplying cocaine and cannabis across the Northwest. The trick for the brothers now was more than hiding out. They needed to transform the stolen 30 kilograms of cocaine into something they could live off, without alerting the gang or the authorities. They faced dual threats, the gang wanting its drugs and reputation back, and the police tracking money and phones. The risk was no longer just of being caught in the warehouse or during the smash and grab, but of being caught in the network of assets, flows, and relationships. During this period, a deeper shift took place. The theft changed the dynamics of the gang's world. The gang could no longer trust its stash house networks as foolproof. Couriers, security, house locations, all had to be reconsidered. The brothers' strike introduced paranoia. The gang started hunting not just for the drugs, but for the identity of the thieves. At the same time, the brothers had to realize they had stepped into the middle of a war, and the battlefield extended across countries. As time passed, the brothers made more mistakes. Hiding money transfers, owning assets, holding property, all leave traces. Fortunately for the police, they had new powers under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002 to freeze, seize, and pursue criminal financial benefit. The heist might have been the headline, but the slow turning gears were the financial trails. Investigators were now looking beyond the stolen drugs to the profit extracted, the investments made, and the movement of cash through front businesses or abroad. Crown Prosecution Service. The twist here is that although the heist seemed to give the brothers a windfall, it was also the start of their undoing. Their exit strategy was weak. They believed that once the drugs were gone into the market, they would be safe, or at least safer. But the reality became that the heist destabilized more than just one stash house. It exposed their network and made them a target for the gang and for law enforcement alike. The longer they stayed on the move, the more footprints they'd leave. By the end of this phase, the brothers found themselves having to make decisions under pressure, turn the drugs into cash quickly, lie low, or disappear entirely. They faced a rapidly closing window. They were fugitives in plain sight, caught between the vengeance of a powerful gang and the full force of the law. The stakes were higher than just the value of a haul. They were playing for freedom, life, and the kind of escape that very few criminals pull off. What followed would show that seizing the drugs was only Act 1. The real battle would be staying one step ahead until the end. In the quiet hours after the heist, what began as a sudden strike of opportunity shifted into a prolonged game of shadows, not just of those two brothers, but of money, secrecy, and survival. Once the haul of roughly 30 kilograms of cocaine had been removed from the stash house, the immediate thrill of success gave way to the longer-term logistics. How to turn the stolen product into cash, keep the gang they robbed from closing in, and stay one step ahead of the law. The brothers soon discovered that in the world of organized crime, the drug itself often becomes the easiest part. The real danger lies in the money. Their first real challenge was converting the valuable load into something usable. High-purity, Class A drugs are not simply loaded into a van and driven off. They require distribution, contacts, couriers, safe houses, and in turn a flow of cash. That flow must be managed, hidden, invested. The brothers, embedded in or allied with a regional gang supplying cocaine and cannabis across the Northwest, found themselves in a network where money laundering was not optional, but essential. It wasn't simply about spending the profit. It was about making sure the profit could not be traced back. In the UK, the legal system recognizes this need for laundering by organized crime. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, POCA, a court can make a confiscation order that forces a defendant to pay back the amount they benefited from criminal conduct. Meanwhile, the offense of money laundering is defined so that any property which is the benefit of criminal conduct, whether directly or indirectly, can be subject to legal action. The brothers' world would soon collide with these mechanisms. In their operation, the brothers turned away from the flashy, immediate spend of illicit cash. The smarter play was layering, concealing, and investing. They and their associates used front businesses, shell companies, false invoices, properties quietly purchased, and bank accounts funneled via other names, all in order to obscure the origin of the funds. One documented case in the UK involved a network that laundered millions of pounds through sham companies and then moved the money to destinations such as Dubai. This pattern wasn't unique. It was mirrored in many drug gang networks, where the larger value isn't the drug on the street, but the cash that flows afterwards. One twist in the brothers' journey: having stolen the drugs, they also inherited the gang's infrastructure of risk. The gang they robbed, though shocked, still maintained distribution channels, finances, and contacts. The brothers now had to manage not only their own laundering of funds, but also the threat of the original gang reclaiming what they lost, and the law following every money move. They quickly found that attempts to hide money typically leave invisible breadcrumbs: property registers, bank transfers, inconsistent business records. And with specialist units in UK policing dedicated to asset recovery, those breadcrumbs mattered. As time passed, the value of the stolen drugs loomed large in the equation of benefit. In confiscation proceedings under POCA, the court considers not just the value of the offense itself, but the wider lifestyle of the offender, assets, property, income flow. For the brothers, the bigger their spend, the more visible they became. The operation they ran may have hidden the initial theft, but it couldn't hide the fingerprint of that scale of value migrating through the system. Another twist: while the drug hole provided the seed, the money laundering system became the trap. The brothers may have believed that once the product was sold and cash obtained, they were safe. But in reality, the cash had to be cleaned, which meant engaging in further transactions, further exposure. They were forced into a long game of risk management, setting up businesses that looked legitimate, routing funds through multiple layers, staying ahead of investigations. It's in those layers that many criminals falter. The money either stagnates, becomes frozen, or leads to seizure by authorities. By the time the authorities began closing in, the heist was no longer the center of the story. It was the laundering that made them vulnerable. Their seemingly smooth escape turned into a gradual entanglement with the system designed to unmask and recover illegal profits. The brothers discovered that in the calculus of crime, stealing the drugs was dramatic, but hiding the value of the crime could determine whether you're caught or free. In the spring of 2023, the legal net finally snapped shut around the brothers. After the daring raid that stripped 30 kilograms of cocaine from a stash house in Liverpool and the long cat-and-mouse game of evasion, they now faced not just charges of drug supply, but a very different kind of reckoning. The court heard that Jason Cox and Craig Cox, aged 38 and 35 respectively, were part of a broader organized crime family operating in the Northwest. They stood convicted of supplying Class A and Class B drugs, conspiracy to commit robbery, and conspiracy to possess criminal property. Crown Prosecution Service. The statements revealed a shocking scale. The criminal benefit from their offending was calculated at nearly $1.86 million for Jason alone. though what the authorities could recover was far less. Liverpool World 2. The court determined that Jason's available assets amounted to just. Craig's parallel order was similar. The disparity between what was made and what was traceable laid bare the hidden machinery behind organized crime. When drugs move, so too must money, and the attempts to hide money often define whether individuals escape total collapse or face full justice. Shortly after the sentencing for their supply and robbery offenses, the focus shifted to the financial aftermath. The proceeds of Crime Act 2002 POCA framework empowered investigators and prosecutors to pursue not only the criminal act, but the benefit derived from it. The court issued confiscation orders. Jason and Craig were each ordered to pay back roughly £40,000, in Jason's case £40,346, or face an additional 9 months behind bars if they failed to settle the amounts. Their older brother, Lee Cox, 41, who did not participate in the heist itself, but was convicted for supplying drugs and possessing criminal property, was ordered to repay £40,000 for his involvement in the family's criminal enterprise. The courtroom revealed another twist. The theft of the cocaine stash was only part of the story. In the years leading up to sentencing, intelligence gathered via encrypted devices, financial tracking, and investigation of front businesses had exposed the network's deeper operations. The brothers were not simply transient thieves. They were embedded in a network that distributed multiple kilograms of cocaine and cannabis across the region. The court documents describe this as an organized crime network supplying the northwest of England. As the legal process advanced, the brothers faced the reality that their value had been exposed. The court made clear that the asset recovery process is a form of punishment tied to the profit of crime. The confiscation order serves as an extension of the sentence beyond the cell. If a convicted person fails to pay the ordered amount within 3 months of the order becoming enforceable, prison terms can be extended. In this case, 9-month addition loomed. From the outside, the scene seemed less glamorous now. Not a high-speed chase or dramatic shootout, but documents, hearings, and the counting of cash and assets. The brothers, once living on the edge of violence and visibility, were now confronted with auditors, accountants, asset freezing orders, declarations of available funds. The scale of criminal benefit that the court accepted meant that although their haul was large, their usable assets were small by comparison. It was one of the fundamental lessons of the case. Large-scale crime may generate large numbers, but the ability to convert and hold on to that value is much more fragile. By the time the final court order was handed down, this phase of the saga had delivered a clear message. The street-level act, the heist, the supply, was just the start. The legal system's ability to pursue the profit transforms the narrative of crime. For the brothers, the moment of triumph, the raid had given way to the moment of reckoning, asset recovery. The additional 9 months of prison time for non-payment hung in the background like a shadow. The value of compliance was now as real as the value of the haul itself. Their world, once full of risk and reward, was now locked in paperwork and court orders. The stash had been taken, the deals made, the money chased, and now the full force of legal consequence had arrived. The heist may have been the bold move, but the courtroom and the confiscation order were the inevitable consequence. In the aftermath of the high-stakes heist and the courtroom drama, what remained for the two brothers and their criminal network wasn't just prison sentences. It was the long haul of consequences, lingering risks, and a vivid demonstration of how modern organized crime works in the UK. The raid on the stash house in Liverpool might have been the flashpoint, but the real challenges lay in the wake of that event. The reputational damage, the pursuit of funds, and the shifting terrain of power and exposure. For the community around Liverpool, the story of the two brothers wasn't simply one of bold criminals getting caught. It underscored how a single event, the theft of 30 kg of Class A cocaine, valued at about £1.2 million, can ripple outwards into violence, instability, and law enforcement escalation. The gang they stole from had to respond. Their supply lines shaken, their trust in collaborators weakened, their financial and logistical systems threatened. The heist introduced questions of vulnerability that didn't evaporate once the brothers were behind bars. Meanwhile, law enforcement and prosecuting bodies made a clear statement. The profit from crime is itself a target. The framework under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, POCA, allows authorities to pursue not just the offenders, but the assets, income, and proceeds derived from criminal conduct. In this case, the brothers were ordered to repay roughly $80,026 between them for the heist-related offending, or face 9 extra months in prison. Crown Prosecution Service, 1. Their older brother, though not part of the actual raid, was still caught up in the supply network, and ordered to repay £40,000 for his portion of involvement. This shows a broader lesson. In organized crime, moving the drugs may be the headline act, but it is the moving of money, the laundering, the investments, the hides and seeks of assets, that can determine whether someone gets away or is trapped. For communities, this means that crackdowns on supply are only part of the solution. The structures behind the money must also collapse. In Liverpool and beyond, specialist units now focus on tracing assets, seizing properties, luxury goods and front businesses that disguise illicit profit. A recent case saw over 1.1 million in cash, watches and vehicles forfeited from a convicted launderer in Merseyside. For the brothers' network, the heist may have seemed like a winning move, but in the end it made them visible. The money they hoped to hide became a liability. With modern investigative methods, encrypted device interceptions, bank transaction analysis, asset registers, the chance to slip completely under the radar has shrunk. The brothers' story signals this change. Criminal benefit no longer resides just in what has been stolen or sold, but in what can be retained, hidden and spent without detection. The ripple effects extend to younger criminals and communities too. The message now is that high-value offenses attract not only traditional policing, but financial scrutiny. The brothers were ordered to repay sums that were dwarfed by the value of their stolen haul, showing that the realm of recoverable assets is often much smaller than the headline crime. In effect, the loss for the criminals is more than just prison time. It's the inability to convert idea into enduring wealth. Finally, the story shows that the criminal underworld's business model depends heavily on two pillars: supply and money flow. If either pillar is destabilized, the network becomes vulnerable. When the brothers stole the stash, they weakened the supply pillar of the gang they robbed. When authorities began targeting their assets, they struck at the money pillar. The cumulative effect is that the underworld cannot rely solely on brute force and bricks anymore. It must wrestle with a financial system that has turned its attention on them. In the end, the two brothers found that their moment of triumph was followed by a prolonged reckoning. The heist made headlines. The repayment order and asset scrutiny made the lasting mark. For organized crime in Liverpool and the UK, more widely, their story is cautionary. Stealing might offer a quick burst of gain, but the structure of laundering, hiding, investing and surviving is far more complex, and far